And we are live. What's going on, YouTube Live? It's your boy, Billy Rowe. I'd like to welcome you to the first row. Today is Tuesday, so you know that's a first row Intersation day. So I want to thank you guys for joining in, hopefully live. If you're watching this on the replay, feel free to contribute to this conversation via the comments. But today's topic is actually going to be on self-love, a little bit of self-love. My guest is no stranger to the first row. I could refer to him as Cousin Rowe. I'm sorry, Cousin Rowe. That's me, Cousin Mo. But he is no stranger to Intersations. He has been on quite a few. Actually, I think this is your third. Is this your third one? Third one? Hold on, your mic is muted, I think.
Yeah, okay. Third one.
Here we go. Third one. So third Intersation for Cousin Mo. He's always bringing the heat, always bringing the fire, always dropping the knowledge. But for those who are new to Intersations, I always like to start with what an Intersation is. So in my opinion, Intersation is when interview meets conversation. And when you put those two things together, you get Intersation. In life, what happens for me personally is I have tons of friends, tons of acquaintances, tons of coworkers, tons of family, all kinds of people that I interact with on a regular basis. And we have many different conversations. But what happens in those conversations is sometimes those conversations go beyond the surface level and into deeper areas of growth. And, you know, what does that mean to you? How does that kind of guide your life type conversations? So in those conversations, what I decided that I wanted to do, with those conversations is open up a literal lens into those conversations and invite you guys into those conversations, not only to listen to the conversation, but also to contribute to the conversation. So though you will see Moses and I interacting back and forth visually, realize that this is definitely a platform for everybody to engage on. So if you can engage with the chat, whether it's a question, a nugget you want to add, or a gem, whatever you want to call it, don't be shy. Feel free to engage. What's going on, Brother Bruce? So with that, I want to take a moment to allow my guest, Moses Jenkins, aka Cousin Mo, to introduce himself to you guys and tell you a little bit about why he feels growth is important and why he feels self-love is important.
Yes, sir. Intersations. I'm back. Cousin Rowe, man.
Back.
I'm back. Third time's the charm, man. Let's make it a great one. I'm gonna try to do a hybrid mix today. So first about me, Cousin Mo. I've been around the family here, Cousin Rowe, for years now. Student, from our early student years, I think we first connected back at Martin Luther King Jr., right?
That's correct. Correct.
And from there, Grant High School. So that was junior high, high school. Always known him in the community. His family has been there. For me, I've eaten at his house. He's eaten at my mama's house, from sports and everything to now having the ability to have these grown conversations. I think Intersations is also like a reflection of what's on the inside of us too, because too often we could only have those surface level conversations. When they go a little bit deeper, we're not capturing that. And the media really doesn't advertise those real deep levels of thought that we might have. So that's a part of our growth here, is identifying that we have agency, we have a role in being that change we want to see in media, in making this content available, even if there's only 10, 20 people that join the live, 200 that watch to restream, but generation after generation, we don't know what our influence might be. All we know is that we have an obligation to keep it real and to give that real, put it out there. So appreciate that.
That real.
What makes life better for Moses, and then let's start to formulate that strategy on doing those things that I believe will make life a little bit better. That's what growth is first identifying what makes life better for you, and then what enables you to be better. That's how I define growth. So thanks for allowing me to join you on this journey.
Hey, no, I appreciate you. Like I said, I appreciate you joining at least once a month, but you know, eventually I'm gonna probably lean on you a little more for a little more frequency for your visits. But as far as this particular conversation, it is again about self-love, and I want to approach this conversation kind of in two different lights. The first light, oh, my mama is on. Hey, Mom.
Hey, Mom.
But I want to approach this in two different lights. The first light being, what is self-love holistically for a person, just male, female, no matter who you are. But I want to also look at this particular topic deeper from the perspective of a man, being what is self-love for a man and how can we better identify with that as men? Because I feel like this is an area where we are underdeveloped, and a conversation like this gives us the opportunity to kind of like, pick up some of that slack. So as always with Intersations, I start off with my first question. Cousin Mo, what does the topic of self-love mean to you?
All right. So self-love, it's an attempt to resolve my inner conflict given those external, often opposing ideals, right? As an example, I'll speak to manhood, or yeah, I was up there in Clear Lake, so I got to smoke inhalation and all of that going on my throat right now, but I'll work on it. But speak towards manhood, masculinity, and how self-love attempts to resolve those opposing views that we face on what it means to be a man today. Many of us, we act according to the expectations set by others. Some of us, we haven't had the will or the ability to self-reflect or to define what manhood means by our own terms. And thus we are held to standards that we never really agreed to. And we're often even called failures, or what do you hear, deadbeats or shaft or other derogatory slander, because we're still allowing others to set an expectation around a type of masculinity that we ought to personify. We don't know what it means to be that type of man because many of us have not considered what it ever means. And for me, that's why self-love is important. That's why being able to define it for yourself and from the lens that you live, your skill sets, you've developed your acumen, your knowledge, you've experienced what you've experienced. And now that you've come into manhood, how will you define for yourself what life means, what makes life good to live for you, and what pursuit you want to be on in order to make life better? So that's self-love and why it's important to me, man.
All right. I like that. I like that. So again, for me, self-love is about that. Really, the best way I could put it is it's almost like it's inner peace. When you have enough love of who you are internally, you're less likely to be swayed by the things that go on externally. So for me, self-love, it's an area actually that when I was younger and even into like my young adulthood, I struggled with. And a lot of things for me were about surrounding myself with as many people as possible in order to, I guess, circumvent self-love. So when I think of self-love, I think about it's really, in essence, the way that we nurture ourselves internally to keep ourselves happy, to keep ourselves balanced, and to keep ourselves at peace, because we all know that life is going to have peaks and valleys. So there has to be something that keeps you on an even kill. Spiritually, I believe that there's a spiritual side that keeps us on an even kill. But I also believe that that self-love dynamic keeps us healthy and keeps our vitality of life kind of like flourishing. So for me, that's what self-love is about. So I told you I want to look at this on two different ways, Cousin Mo. So the first question that I really, really have for you, I'm going to change how I want to word it a little bit. So why do you think self-love is such a difficult topic for men? If you do think that, I'm going to assume that you do. So I'm going to say, why do you think that self-love is such a difficult topic for men?
It's both a difficult topic as well as it's a difficult journey, right? It's not just like an accomplishment. This is one of those things that's with us like mythos. And I think that's most difficult to even discuss because of the stigma that's around self-love. Self-love is almost the idea of self-love, even having self in there. What other words do you have? Selfish, self-centered. It's about, doing for you, when the real narrative of manhood has been, let's say the narrative has been do for others. It's an other approving society of the expectation is that the utmost respect for men are men who give freely of themselves to their family. So do you have a wife? Do you have children? Do you have responsibilities? Do you have a job? And it's really about how is that man connecting to his external rather than to his internal? What are some of the other forces or factors that we have to look at? Men aren't supposed to cry. Men aren't supposed to even really feel. When men become angry, that's a bad thing. That's almost you get slapped on the wrist. So when I looked at it, and I know you come from peace, and I say peace, but I also say to resolve the inner conflict, because that inner conflict is what we're really at war with. Is that in my heart or my own consciousness telling me to do X, Y, and Z, but then these external forces that are opposed to me doing X, that don't want me to do Y, and definitely don't want me to achieve Z. So I looked at two different ones, the matriarchal definition and then the dominant society's definition of what it means to be a man. The matriarchal, that's your mothers, your grandmothers, starts off early in childhood. They cultivate it. Sharing is caring, doing for others, giving your toy, giving your last piece of bread, trying to emulate what a good man is. And that's in his ability to share and provide. Some of the other lessons we learned, how to honor and submit to the woman's authority inside of the household, sharing of finances, sharing of space. In all of our lives and in all of our situations, we're prompted to be like the one who's giving, not prompted to be the one who's doing for self. And then also in the dominant society, the dominant society is going to impair, or they seek to impair, our natural self to foster a subservient personality, right?
Right.
They want you to go to work. They want you to respect the governance and the order of things. They believe that a man that's only going about his own self-interest or self-interested, not the self-made man, but the one who's self-interested, the one who really takes time to reflect. They want him to be reflect rather. That's like a Buddhist monk or something. Like they want you to isolate yourself, some Henry David Thoreau, go to the woods, don't connect yourself with a broader society. But the expectation is, if you're going to be in the interconnected society, then you're supposed to become codependent upon those who are around you, rather than someone who just looks inward and says, look, guys, I have some things that I'm dealing with. I need to deal with them. So.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a good point that we would rather see you isolate yourself than contaminate what we're working on. And what that does is it causes a man who does, where we grew up at, if you were talking what we're talking about today, back then, oh, you soft, oh, there'd be some words that they use I'm not going to use, but they would use some language that would try to belittle you out of caring about yourself, belittle you out of marching really to your own beat. And so you're right. I think society-wise, or the societal pressures want to push that man who is concerned with himself, or that is focused on loving himself, wants to kind of push him to the side so that they can mass produce the subservient male and the subservient culture. So I do agree with that. It's funny because I was listening in preparing for this particular show. I was watching the show that I did about 3 years ago, and the show was about, being good men. And a lot of the things that I brought up in that show were about nurturing the man, nurturing himself, not finding validation in a woman, not, just tons of things, not finding validation in his job, but nurturing himself. And after that show was over, one of the comments was, well, everything you just said about manhood, you're just talking about self-growth. That's very selfish. No, that's very self-loving for me to want myself to grow. So I agree on those two terms, where there's that giving side, and then there's that societal pressures that want to push you away from loving yourself, want to push your emotions into a closet or a box, and really have you conform to being okay with a deficiency of love. So for my next question, I want to ask you, because one of the words you brought up was selfish and self-centered when we hear the word self-love. How do we know if we're giving ourselves, it's going to work to this question, but how do we know if we're giving ourselves an adequate amount of self-love? Like, what are some of the characteristics of a man who has an adequate amount of self-love, or a person who has an adequate amount of self-love?
Let's do it this way. I'm gonna start in the negative and then come back to the positive. The negative are the things that you can see always. Are they stressed? Are they stress is probably the biggest one. If you see somebody who is outwardly stressed and their emotions are starting to wear on their sleeves, it's probably an indication that they're not giving themselves the self-appreciation or self-value, self-love that they could be. Not just stress as other symptomatics. How are they carrying themselves? There's men who just they slouch over. They're broken physically. You can see it. They've moved from a position of being healthy and vibrant. They have that vitality that you're referring to a position of almost weakness. Their body is giving out because they haven't taken the time to manifest any of that energy in self. They've been just giving and giving and giving. I like to call it like the sponge effect. A sponge is there, it can absorb so much water, but at some point, if it's not absorbing water, it just becomes brittle and frail. You'll see it start to piece away and chip away. And that's that self-love that's being put into it. But then at other scenes, if it's absorbed so much content or liquid content of another form, it just gets so full, it starts to leak out. And you can tell by looking at that sponge what it's been absorbing. If it's been absorbing nothing and it's dry and it's withering away, then that's a sign of not a lot of self-love. And if it's absorbed a lot of stress or negativity, a lot of vitriol, a lot of resentment, the work life is unbalanced, the home life is out of balance, the mental life is unbalanced, then you'll see that seeping out as well in some of their anger and how they start to treat other folks. So giving yourself that self-love is indicative of seeing people who they have that healthy vibrancy. They can laugh at things such as politics or things that other people are still uptight about. Call me the N-word, I don't really care. The slander, I don't really care. Things like that. Not that I don't care, because I do have a feeling, I do have a sentiment about it, but I'm not going to let it take me off of my purpose. And so you can see someone who's really driven. I think I don't want to sound like Creflo Dollar here, but people who give themselves self-love and they have established a healthy rhythm with that, you can start to probably see it in not just their physical health, but probably even in their economic status or their financial security, because they'll start having better relationships. You'll see it in their relationship at home. You could probably see it in their parenting. And I'm gonna use probably because I don't have any white statistics or, census bureaus and things like that to validate it. But in my opinion, there has to be some correlation. Maybe go into it and look at it, but has to be some correlation with your finances. Excuse me. With your finances, with your physical health, and then even with your relationships that you have. So your social health as well, if you're giving yourself sufficient levels of self-love.
So I'm going to ask a question about something that you said. So you're talking about the sponge effect, where you might have too little, and I've kept sponge way past his lifespan, so I know what you're talking about when it dries out and it becomes SpongeBob on the sand. But that sponge effect, when it's saturated and it can't take on any more fluid, do you feel like that can happen because you said it can happen in the negative sense, where that negativity starts leaking out, but do you feel like that also can act as a barrier for you even engaging with self-love, because you have no absorbency to pull that self-love in and actually retain it? Do you feel like that can happen with those negative overflows, I guess we'll call them?
Absolutely. So what did they say? My cup runneth over. Some people don't have the capacity. There's nothing left inside of their cup to take in. I think my mom used to say, I'm on my last nerve. But yeah, you come to the point where when you're analyzing or you're observing folks, where it's like, I don't think they have the capacity to love because they're so broken. Or there's some people where you see them and they're just at a level and you can't do anything for them, even in the positive, because they're radiating so much positivity that it's like, well, what can I learn from you? And that's how I established some relationships with mentors and champions, because I was vibing, I was good, I had a good vibe, but they had so much positive vibe, even in their level of, and one of the things that they said, well, I love myself, I know my worth, I know my value. And that starts to seep out as well. So it can even be in the positive as well. But in the negative, yeah, that is a barrier from being able to get through to them. Hopefully, if you're wise enough, if you've experienced enough, you'll be able to see that from a distance and don't have any of that toxic, whatever seepage, that toxic seepage have to come onto you to bring out that old Moses back in the day.
So you said something there that I want to really quickly touch on as well. So is there, if there's an ability to saturate your sponge, is there ever an ability to actually increase your sponge size to pull in more of the positive, or well, you definitely pull in more of the negative, but pull in more of the positive or negative?
I don't know if the size increases, but as we learn to forgive and we learn to, like, some people like to celebrate too long. I think I've heard that before, to where they're holding on to past memories so long when they could have cleared up room for some more victories in the future or even in the present, but they're still holding on to their glory days, their high school days. You know, the football players back in high school, I broke all of these records and things. And then after that, what happens to the continuation of those stories? It's because their sponge was so full of those glories and those victories that they've moved into a space of comfort or convenience and not able to even take on anymore. So maybe there's a way psychologically, I know they say we only use so much of our brain, which is the big sponge, but maybe there's a way psychologically that we can increase, like we used to make that prayer, enlarge my territory, as a part of our prayer. But is there something that we can do rather than calling on or manifesting that the divine? Is there something that we can do to increase ours? And maybe that comes with, just growth itself. Maybe we are growing the size of our sponge where we used to not be able to take on so much. Maybe there's a mix of how much have I been able to forgive and move on with that freed up space, as well as how much more capacity did I create by learning these new things, by traveling to those new places, by engaging in those new conversations, and by being able to move into a more reflective space to where even meditation gives me some peace. So there might be a good balance. You might be onto something.
Okay, I like that. Appreciate it. So for my next question, I want to ask you, so that's the concept of, absorbency. How much can we how much can we hold? Capacity, not absorbency, capacity. But I think, and this kind of ties to this question, how do we, in your opinion, how do we know, or how does a person know if they are even giving themselves the proper love? So I'll give you a little analogy to help get the juices going. So if there's a plant, right, and we have a tree, a peach tree, and during the spring, you need to put the fertilizer down around the tree so it has nutrients to draw up into the tree to create peaches. If you don't do that and you put salt down instead of fertilizer, you're more than likely going to dry the tree out because it's going to be pulling in something that's causing dehydration. So in that same sense, where you're pulling in the wrong nutrient, with self-love, I feel like there may be some times where you may think you're loving yourself, but you're not really speaking your direct love language. So how do we identify whether we're getting that proper nutrition and when it comes to self-love?
Well, that's a challenge for all mankind. Like, for real, like the ability to self-reflect, or to be able to look at one's circumstances and situations that one's in, and to analyze it, to look at what actions happened, to observe it, and then to make critical thoughts about it, and then start that process over. I think that might even be a learned trait, but it's definitely something that's much needed. The tree itself is just going, as we are that tree, we're going to keep sucking in the nutrients. The world could be that planter, or the person who planted the tree. The world could be the one that's giving us salt. The media could be giving us salt. I hate to say it, but sometimes our church home or our faith could be giving us salt and dehydrating us from our natural selves. And we don't know, we're indifferent to it without self-reflection, to be able to differentiate between what's the good nutrients and how much of it is good, how much to the point of it becomes bad. Will it become phosphorus to us and start to dehydrate ourselves? And I can't, that's the answer for all mankind, or a question for all mankind right there. All I know is, in my journey, I'll speak from a personal, in my journey, I had to give myself permission to stop. I had to give myself permission to be quiet and to allow myself to actually think through some things. And I became more analytical over time, where I used to just be gung-ho about actions. I had to give myself time to wait. Like I used to always see it on my mom's bumper. I think it was a religious reference, wait 3 days. And that became something like a mantra to me. Like if it's a real big decision that you have to make, then wait. And
Right.
just let your thoughts happen. Dream about it. Like they say, sleep on it. Wake up in the morning, and now my juices are really going. So I need to wait again. And now my juices have died down, and I'm like, well, I really want to make this decision, almost like the kid before a field trip. Now wait again. And then finally, on that third day, you get up and you have, having considered the highest energy to the depressant energy, and then that normalizing energy, what decision would I make now that I've had time to consider all of those different energies? So with that comes self-love. And how do I identify what do I need in the form of self-love? Is it better communication? Is it, time alone? Is it a book to read, like a tangible thing? Is it like an action? Do I need to work out? My self-love is personified in my exercise, or is it just my freedom? I like to hike, or I like to go whitewater rafting, kayaking, or something like that. My freedom to try something new. Maybe that's how I self-love or how I actualize it. We don't know those things and what will work for anybody. So having that ability to first think and process information, and then the freedom to try something. The freedom, give yourself permission to try something. And if you like it and it gives you some wholeness, some wellness, like you say, some peace, or it helps you say, this is something that people used to always tell me was not for me. This ain't for Black folks, kayaking. This ain't for me going, going hunting. This ain't for me going, fishing or something like that. But if that's where you find your peace, then by all means, consider that your self-love, or your avenue, your pathway towards self-love.
So I like what you're bringing up there, because it kind of directs me into a different question than my next question. But physical activities outside of yourself, outside of meditation, outside of reflection, how much do you think that those play a part in that self-love process? And how much do you think plays a part of the internal climate?
I know, like, let me see, who is it? Carl Jung, who had the 4 personality types. Some people are more dominant, some people are introspective, some are more social, some are more just, compliant. It was like a DISC personality assessment. Even though I may not agree with his categorization or how he calls it, I do understand from that there are different personalities. And for some, it might be the need to do something more physical. For others, it might be the need to introvert. I know I'm more analytical now. I used to would have needed to go run. I used to go play ball at Hagenwood Park. I used to find it in exertion and then connecting. I was a social person. So connecting with other people, going out was the thing that I used to like to do. But as I got a little older, I became a little bit more analytical. Now I can read a book, or I can watch some TED Talks, some inspirational videos. I can, some people can cook. That's their thing. They go in that kitchen and they'll just whip it up. They don't even need to eat it all, but if cooking gives them some type of self-love, and that's how they do it. Some people, we have to say it's through sex. They need to, I guess, ejaculate in order to move into that space of, okay, now I'm back. They need to recalibrate. So it's just going to depend on the person. For me, I know it is analytical, but for others, it's probably a lot. They have to do something physical. They have to. That's it. I think where we find ourselves in trouble is when, once again, the dominant society's definition is to impair your ability. They're to put governance on you and to make an economic outcome. So if you're one who needs to be physical, then they're like, wait, there's rules against violence. There's a gym you can go to where you have to commodify it, and you can't just find yourself, or you have to be somebody who can have access to capital to buy your own equipment and take it home, get your own gym set up in the backyard, get your own punching bag. Or you can start to develop too much self-love, or that toxic self-love, where now your need for physical exertion then becomes the violence that you bring into your own home, or something like that. If that's where you're at, is physical, then I would still say find your balance, introspect, see where you're at. Okay, maybe I am physical exertion. Maybe I do like to go out a little bit more, and then be willing to give yourself the freedom to try some of those things. Maybe your physical doesn't have to be using your fists, but in building, constructing, volunteering, like, you know, they build those homes, Habitat for Humanity and things, but there's other venues that we might leverage that help us to, you know, maximize how am I loving myself, but how am I also doing so in a way that still, you know, uplifts others and such. So, yeah.
Okay. So then I'm going to go opposite of that then, because that's the physical, I forget the categories that you said, physical.
I'm analytical.
Well, I'm analytical, but I'm also a physical person. Like there's plenty of times where if I have a hard day, I'm going to hit the heavy bag just to
That's what I was meaning, just like that. You consider that self-love though?
Hey, at the end of the day, somebody getting a 2-piece and a biscuit is better than bag. Better than bag. But going to the other side of that, where you're nurturing self-love, if love is the positive, then whereas many would think the opposite of love is hate, I always say the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. How can somebody be indifferent towards their own self-love?
It's easy. Distractions are time consuming. And then, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. The kids are ready. Wife gets the kids ready by 4:30. We're out of the door by 4:50. All of this is just to go to work. We have an hour commute. She has an hour and a half because we ride share, and I'm a little bit further. And so I get to work my 9 hours, and then take a lift to go meet her halfway home. Volunteer for about an hour, so that's still about 4:30. So 13 hours out of my day have just been, and then we commute home, get home probably about 5 o'clock or 6. So 14, 15 hours out of my day I've already dedicated to what the dominant society's definition of masculinity or love is, or life is. And so whatever confusion that I've absorbed in those 16 hours, I now have to decompress. And I may have my wife through communication as an analytics. I can talk my way through it. And that's a bit of self-love, but it's in such a condensed form of time. You know, the span of time that I have to focus on that is so small that how could I possibly get through all of the different things and the subtle nuances without absorbing it? You know what I'm saying? Like having those conversations, some of them were good, some of them were bad, victories and those defeats, you still have to compress and compartmentalize and reflect on, or you won't really learn and grow from them. But there's so much that happens. And so get home, now you got to eat, you got to cook or something like that. You got to, whatever you didn't clean before you left, you got to clean, get ready for the night. You got to iron to get ready to go do that again. Saying all that to say, we dedicate so much time to the distractions that we don't put enough time into self-love. How can you be indifferent to self? Them bills do. Around the 14th, you can get real indifferent around the 29th. As the stresses start to mount up, or as those defeats start to add up, then you're not self-loving. And then the obligations that start to pull you away, not just the bills, but even the relationships, right? So instead of just being focused on self and saying, hey, let me decompress, we move into that position of how can I help you love yourself when we're in those relationships. And so, you know, I got 2 kids, so working with them and helping them understand that they can value themselves as well as be of value to others. I have a wife. I want her to know that she's valued and praised. So being able to do for her. And then myself, you see what I just did there? I put myself fourth out of 4 people.
Right.
That can become indifferent.
And I think you're onto something there as far as with distractions, because I mean, we have just what you displayed as 14 hours of distractions. That doesn't list getting in front of your phone, scrolling on social media. That doesn't list watching your favorite show. That doesn't, I mean, there's just so many opportunities to be distracted. How nice it would be if one of those distractions was just simply loving yourself. Simply find that committing to as much as you commit to that 14-hour span of your day, committing to that in a daily aspect where you're able to love yourself. Guaranteed, I'm going to love myself somehow, some way today, every day. So I think you're onto something with that when you say distractions. So I kind of want to change directions a little bit. because there were some things when in the beginning of this where you were saying, you know, when we think self-love and you hear the word self, you start thinking selfish, you know, self-centered. But there actually is another self that I want to see how closely, in your opinion, it is related to self-love. So what do you think is the connection, if there is one in your opinion, between a person's self-love, we'll say routines, and their self-worth?
That was a good one. So self-love and my routine. So first, I have to be transparent here. My self-love is almost rooted in my distractions. I found a way to make, like, even these conversations on YouTube, finding a way to look at the material that I was given and try to, you know, what do they always say? Eat the meat, throw away the bones.
Right.
And so I find myself looking for programming that's a little bit more edifying for me. So I like the stocks, I like the bonds, I like those who are talking about real estate investments. I like Seeking Alpha, the Robinhood or the Stash app. So any of those things, when I'm looking on my phone, I'm looking at things that I feel are about my financial security, which is the thing that I deeply root on my self-love. I'm like, over time, I actually want to make money on these things. So I need to be learning what are the best practices right now in order to make a more effective use of my time later. And so with that, I gave myself permission to be on like YouTube and you know, sometimes I'll be on like the O'Shea Duke channel, and then sometimes I'll go back to my TED Talks and my things like that. So I find my balance, but those are my actions that are still about my self-love. The connection there is, I would say, almost acknowledging what your end game is. For some people, self-love is in the form of health. So if you're one who goes to the gym, you give yourself that number. I want to be able to bench press 225 pounds 25 times. That's a real smart goal and a smart number. You look like you probably there already. Like,
I'm like the bar right now.
Yeah, the bar. If your thing is, now I'm going to add some weight to this bar. I mean, and that's just an analogy. It can also be metaphoric, right? So which bars are you looking to push in your life, even when it comes to self-love? For others, it's like, I find they might find peace in the kitchen. And so they give themselves the permission then to watch some of those Food Network channels, to learn some new dishes, to try some. They might put a goal as, I want to come up with my own book, a recipe book, and then share it to 100 of my friends on Facebook. And I just want to see some testimonies from people who have tried my dishes. That might be something that allows them to incorporate their self-love into their self-worth. So now they know they have a Facebook, they know they have friends and family, and they want to be of a sharing mind where it's no longer selfish. They want to do for others. So, hey, how do I take what I do for myself, and I'm finding some utility and some love in it, and share it without it being one of those things where it's like, well, if you're not doing this, something's wrong with you. Oh, you don't want to eat healthy. That's why you're not on this video. No, for you, it's just in the act of, this was the thing that I was doing. I like stocks and bonds. I found some good trades. I give the information out like, hey, have you been watching this? This is a good one. If nobody signs up, that's all right, because this was still a part of my self-love regimen.
Right. Okay.
So that's how we connected. I don't know. Did that kind of answer the question on how we connected to self-worth?
It did. But now I want to ask you, because you answered that question really well. I do want to ask you, I want to ask a little deeper, because that self-worth aspect, going back to what you're saying, as far as like looking at stocks and giving that information, and sometimes, I mean, I'm guilty of this. Sometimes that self-love can become an obsession, and it just becomes all you're doing is you're feeding yourself self-love, 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 self-love. And it almost becomes, instead of being a healthy self-love, it becomes almost like a self-pleasure. So it's funny, because when I started doing videos online about 2 or 3 years ago, when I started doing those videos, I never seen myself looking back at the videos in the aspects of like, yeah, well, what did I say and how many people liked it? I never seen myself in that. And when in those times where I may have stopped for a week or 2 or 3, it was those times where I was questioning, wait, am I doing this because I like to spend the time reflecting and I want to share that reflection with others in hopes to promote thought within them? Or am I doing this because I want to be in front of a limelight so that people can see me and be like, oh, you know, Billy Rowe after high school is doing well. I don't really care about that because I don't get to talk to the people from high school anyway. But I questioned myself on whether I was slipping into self-pleasure and self edification. Yeah, if I was slipping into that. So I guess the question is at some point, if self-love becomes self-pleasure, is that really a beneficial mentality in your opinion?
Yeah. And you got the right to be selfish. And I think, who was it? Not Stewart. Yeah, it was. No, Stewart was utilitarian in philosophy, but there was one who was talking about all people are it's psychological egoism, and they say people are innately selfish. And so I think when society wants you to be subservient to it, right? So they want you to find self gratification in just watching TV, and that becomes a distraction, right? And no, I'm doing for self now. I just need to relax. And how do they relax? Now they want you to turn on that TV. It's a marketer's delight. And so you'll sit there and you'll just watch TV rather than yourself finding your edification in, I am an analytical person and I want to share some of these thoughts because these conversations are deep and people really might not have access to this level of information, particularly coming from this audience. Particularly, do they have access to African-American veterans of the United States Army who are fathers, young Black men, educated at the prestigious Morehouse College? Do they get that off? Probably not. So let me bring my cousin Mo on, who can give them that perspective, because this may be the only time they get it besides listening to Martin Luther King Jr., who didn't serve in the Army, by the way. So he had me on. All the other ones were similar. And then from yourself, your experience in giving it out there, putting it out there, they will not have that. And likewise, that message is universal from anybody who's finding themselves engaged in something. They give themselves a SMART goal, something that was, it was originally like their meditation. But then now you can go on YouTube now and see yoga classes.
Right.
And then Kemetic yoga. So some people who wanted to study under the Kemetic science or Egyptology or however you want to call it. And then now you have Kemetic yoga. So the combination of those who are becoming more conscious and aware of their body. And then now they're saying this is something that's good and useful, not just to me. Let me share that for others who might be on their journey still looking to find something that they can do that is positive for themselves. So I would just continue to encourage you. If you start finding yourself wanting to monetize it, I would say monetize it, because you are still in a society that wants you to commodify. I mean, you are a commodity. You are valuable, and they want you to put a dollar price or whatever there is on there. But at the same time, the fact that you're wrestling with those thoughts show that you're human. We are conflicted by a lot of things, particularly when if you're working out, at some point you're going to say, am I doing this because I want to be healthy? And when women give me the attention, does that make me feel good? When they see my guns out, and so feeling good that you've worked out and now you're reaping the rewards of it, that's going to be something that we're challenged with a lot, because naturally, I don't think that we were made to be capitalists. I don't think that we were made to be commodified. I don't think that that is our sense of purpose. I don't think that we fit in this box very well. So all we can do on our journey is try to make the best of the box that they want us in, as well as the box that we're breaking out of, even in our own shells. So that's growth.
That's growth. Exactly. That's growth. As they say, when it's all hard and it's all bad or it's all good, that's just life. So get over it.
Take it all.
So you bring up something because you mentioned absolutely it's okay to be selfish. So I want to ask you this question, which I had as a secondary question, but I want to ask you, how do you display selflessness without jeopardizing or compromising loving your own self?
How do I do it?
Wait, before you answer, even more so as a father with children.
Yeah.
Yes, in order to be a father, you have to have children technically. But as a father with children, how do you display to your children selflessness without jeopardizing or compromising loving your own self?
That's interesting too, because when you look at kids, especially I got great kids, they're giving already, so we can learn from them. Like gave my son $50. I didn't give it to him, but he got $50. He gave 40 of it to his little sister because she had a shirt. She made the shirts for the family reunion, and she was selling them. And so they needed to go back to the store, get some more shirts, some sizes had run out. And before then, I had told them, look, you need to ask them on Facebook who all wants a shirt and what are their sizes. And my wife was like, no, don't tell her that. Let her figure it out. And so I was kind of going back and forth between both thoughts. Like, do you just let her figure it out? She didn't ask. Or do you just let them get all the way there and now they need some additional sizes? And so got there and he was like, well, here, he gave her the $40 that she could have used. He could have used and bought a game. He could have used and, got some Fortnite skins or whatever, and whatever he does with money, but he didn't, because he already has inside of him the characteristics of selflessness.
Right.
So learning from them, listening to them, taking the time when they're in their imagination or their imaginative state, and just let them tell you that full story and then repeat it and then repeat little parts and then have them tell you it again, almost like when they were real little and they wanted you to read that same book over and over again, just for that time and just for the connection, just for the imagination. Let them run with that imagination and tell you their full story, i.e. when wife comes home after a hard day, 7 more questions. And when you think you've asked enough questions, ask 2 more questions. And when you think that's enough, ask 2 more, not about you and your day, not pivoting, not talking about anything else. How do we start to engage them in that? And, one of the things that I said on a previous one is when you have that level of love to where you just want to see her win, if she's winning, we're winning, and you can get there, then I'm not there yet. I said it even then. I'm not completely there yet. I'd be like, when she wins, what does that mean for me? So I'm a little selfish, but I'm still learning. These are subtle little tricks that might help when it comes to that communication, right? So communication is still going to be key. Being able to listen is the main part of communication, 2 ears, 1 mouth. So hearing them, actually hearing them to the point of being able to ask, like, you have great freaking questions. Being able to ask that second layer question that dives a little bit deeper into why they were feeling things, what happened then, what did they try, what happened when they tried it, why didn't they, what other things were they considering that they didn't try, why did they rule that out as something that they could have. You see, those are letting them go deeper and deeper into that conversation a little bit more. And so my selfishness wants to just say, well, here's what I did, and that's what I want to tell you, but also being able to acknowledge that they have a self too. And so that's my, I mean, it gets a little convoluted, right? Because selfishness versus selflessness, doing for others, but being able to appreciate that when I'm doing for others, that's gratifying for me.
Right. And I think that's gleaning it's almost like a byproduct or a love byproduct, which happens because you're spending time loving somebody else and you're allowing them the space to grow. And in doing that, it prompts you to ask yourself questions on, do you want to give your child the answer every time and have them call you for the rest of your life? Or do you want to give them the mind that is able to figure out these questions on their own and explore these journeys on their own and be willing to be that guide as needed? So I think you're right. It has a byproduct of love. So that I think answers, in short, the question is really, how do you promote selflessness but not compromise loving yourself? It's finding those things that bring you pleasure in doing for others. So that's a really good response you gave there, cousin.
Type that down real quick. You said finding.
You don't ever ask me what I just said. Yeah. It really just finding the byproduct of love that comes from basically serving other people. Like you have to catch it on the replay. We're at 49 minutes. So if you go back to like 45 minutes, you'll find it on the replay.
45 to 49 minutes. It was somewhere in there.
Somewhere between there.
Answer. If anybody was looking for a solution, it's somewhere between 45 and 49 minutes.
Right.
Finding pleasure in doing for others is how you balance selfishness with selflessness.
So we're at 50 minutes now. We're probably going to end up going over tonight. So for those of you guys who are tuning in live, you're welcome to stay in. But if you have questions, comments, anything that you want to add, start adding that stuff into the chat so that way we can see it, engage with it while we're live. That's the benefit of being here live. So take advantage. But Cousin Mo, I want to ask you the next question that I have here. So in your opinion, what impact do you believe that self-love has on our influence with others? And you alluded to this at the beginning, so I kind of want to dive a little deeper into that.
Absolutely. So, man, people need examples, right? People are character worshipers. They want to see somebody who's got it all together or figured out, or they want to at least believe when they see that person that they got it together, they got it figured out, things are clicking, you know, they got money, cars, whatever it is. They just want to see an example. And so, like we were talking about the sponge analogy, once it's seeping out and you're able to help others, that's the love that we want to see. We want a society where we're no longer commodified, a society where we're no longer held in these little small boxes, these tiny boxes that don't really encapsulate the true human experience. And we want to experience each other in our goodness. This society will drive you to greed. It'll drive you to stress. It'll drive you to, you know, corrupt levels of thinking, immoral actions. It'll drive you towards things that are secular and not of another or a higher level or a higher energy. And so what we want is for ourselves to be that light that they need to see. How do we influence people? When you have love and you have peace, you have a way of not, you know, conversations. People look at you and say, I would have, ooh, somebody couldn't have talked to me like that. People will be like, I would have been able to handle it like that, or I would have been all upside their head, or you know how people like to talk. They like to put violence in there because that's almost becoming the new norm. But in order for us to break that norm and to experience people at their most grandiose, we're going to have to start seeping out. That's the influence of self-love. When you're in shape, if the people who are physical, right, and they get in shape, you can see when they're walking through the mall how people respond to that. When people are intellectual and they're at their highest level, you hear them debate, you're like, oh my goodness, that brother got it. Like these TED Talks or these professional speakers, people admire them. Right? When you're doing it financially and people like stocks and bonds, they want to be the best on Wall Street, but never touch Wall Street. You can see them from a distance, and it's admirable when people start finding their true peaks. And I think that's because at some point they identified this is what's going to make my life better. And this is the path that I want to be on. They give themselves permission to do that, find outlets to where they can do that well, and then also give to others. That sponge is seeping over the positivity now, and they're empowering others. And they find, like we said, some benefit or some pleasure in empowering others. And so that's starting to grow that concept even more. It's marketing itself like its own engine. It's its own political machine. It's moving, right? We're starting to see self-love become the thing that people do. Yoga is a reflection, meditation, prayer at one point. The name Jesus Christ, calling on the name of Jesus when you're going through, that didn't always exist. Somebody had to say that gives me pleasure, and that's something that I want to tell somebody. So these actions are these big themes. They're somebody saying there has to be an answer. They found something that worked for them, and then, you know, at some point as they were manifesting that thing and actualizing their journey, others were gravitated to it.
I don't think you know that you said something so powerful, but I had to write it down. I even made the this face when you did it. But you said we are going to have to start seeping out. Like that's such a powerful statement, because like you said, society tries to put us into these little boxes. And so instead of being these emotive creatures, instead of having emotions and showing those emotions, we try to keep them inside a box in ourselves. Instead of, and love being one of the most powerful emotions of them all, we try to encapsulate it and hide it. But what you said is we have to start finding a way to seep out. We have to start seeping out. That we need to start being so saturated with love that it's dripping off of us. And that's powerful. Really quick, I want to interject this into the conversation. Carolyn just wrote, when you decide to give yourself permission to unapologetically act on loving yourself, how can you fill that space that was once depleted without putting yourself and your needs ahead of all others. So going back, Bruce just said a great question, Carolyn. Going back to that's kind of like that selfishness. So you've made this commitment to yourself that you're going to love yourself and you're going to put yourself first. And you even in this conversation said we got to put ourselves, being selfish is good. And then you were like, but first come my kids, and then my wife, and then I'm fourth. So
I said it.
So how do you fill that space that was once depleted, putting yourself and your needs ahead of all others? How do you put yourself first in line? I mean, shoot, when we was in elementary school, we used to try to run to be first in line. Unless it was recess. Wasn't nobody trying to go in during recess.
Yeah, but because I was hungry.
Right. But to go out or to go to lunch, you try to be first in line. How do you get to that place when it comes to self-love, putting yourself first? What do you think are some tools that would help with that?
Oh, yeah. So SMART goal, definitely set them. Have a time, have a number. Know your number. If it's the number of push-ups, number of sit-ups. If you're a physical person, number of times in the punching bag, or quantified in hours, how much time you're going to spend shutting off. If it's shutting off, shutting down, or turning on that energy inside of you for meditation, if that's your thing. But give yourself this SMART goal. And there's a lot that will distract you and should be there to distract you. That's what the purpose of a distraction is. Its sole purpose is to take you off of your purpose. So being intentional, having agency, forgiveness. Forgiveness is a big one. You have to forgive. You will feel bad to the point where, just like you say, let's say you start the YouTube channel and you wanted to share this information, and at some point you're like, wow, but am I going back to see how many views and clicks I like? So you start becoming a little bit conscientious about it. You can start becoming conscientious about your self-love too, right? Like, am I starting to neglect my kids? Am I starting to not put them? Am I being too? So you can have that forgiveness. Forgive yourself and get back into it, because you realize that you were in a space where you were creating a negative energy. You were becoming more toxic. You were becoming less valuable of a person. Your human experience, even other folks, as they tried to experience you, had to experience a fake you, or they had to experience a patched up Band-Aid, makeshift you. The you that you could barely present, because there was so much broken and hurtingness going through you. The only good you that they saw was the you when you was a little bit tipsy, because you were so broken, you were uncomfortable being your normal you. Oh, I'm so much funnier when I'm drunk. No, you were not.
Right.
You're so much funnier when you're whole. Forgive yourself. Yeah. So forgive yourself. What are some things that you can do to forgive yourself? That comes with self-reflection, right? So when you do that and you're like, oh, I'm feeling bad, I don't know what you do. Sometimes I pinch myself, like literally pinch myself, snap out of it. Sometimes I shake my head no. Like sometimes I don't know. I have little things that I do, nuances that are real things that I do. I really actually pinch myself. I really do tell myself no, because I'll sit there in my own thoughts as an analytic. I'll sit there in my thoughts like, wow, I really messed up this time. Then I'll turn around trying to overcompensate, and I get in that cycle. Now, oh, I missed this opportunity to spend time with the kids because I was committed. No, commit to doing that. If you're giving yourself some time as a SMART goal to spend, write it on the wall, put it on the mirror. Get a blinking light above your door if you really need a blinking light. The door, college, they used to put like a sock on the doorknob that meant do not enter. Give yourself some time. Whatever you need to do to give yourself some time, give yourself permission, give yourself the freedom to do it, and then hold yourself accountable. Take agency. Are you taking agency when it comes to giving yourself time to love yourself? Or are you becoming your own biggest distraction? Are you allowing those other things that always were there to distract you? And then when it comes to kids, like I said, I got 2 kids and a wife who I put 1, 2, 3, and then myself 4. And that's my balance. And I am all right with that. All right.
All right. Well, shoot, man, I just want to add one more nugget to what you were already saying. So really, it came down to really forgiving yourself, give yourself agency, and then be accountable to what you say you want to do or what you're going to do to love and nurture yourself. The other thing that comes with forgiveness is it allows you to rehumanize yourself. One of the biggest things that I learned when I used to attend anger management was that the way you enact violence on somebody is you have to objectify them. You have to take them out of the human element in order to treat them in a way that you wouldn't treat a human. Um, just like even with an animal, like you see people do cruelty to animals, you have to take that animal out of the sense of a pet, out of something that is trusting you to take care of it and not to harm it. You have to take all that and erase that and say, this is something else. This is a toy. This is a makeshift explosive. Like, you have to objectify in order to treat something abnormally, treat something that you would normally treat normally abnormally. So that humanizing element, I think, is found in forgiveness, is that it reiterates to us that we may make mistakes, we may have shortcomings, but that doesn't mean that we are any less in love with ourselves. That doesn't mean that we are any less, here we go, that we are any less worthy of loving ourselves. So I just wanted to add that to that. One more question that we have here. And I'm going to read the correction, I believe, should self be the primary focus instead of others being the primary focus for the preservation of emotional and spiritual health? I think you've answered that, but I just wanted to put that question out there for those who may be watching in the replay or those who are listening and not able to see the chat. That is a question that you might want to ask yourself to try to get a deeper understanding, again, that reflection time on what self-love is for you and what it means to you. So with that, I want to move on to my last question for you, Cousin Mo. As far as from this conversation tonight, if you were to present 2 or 3 takeaways that you want people to leave with tonight from this conversation, what exactly would those be for you?
Those universal takeaways, right? So one I think that we resolved was self-pleasure versus self-love. Self-pleasure versus self-love. There are certain levels to self-love that are in the actions that one takes to resolve the inner conflict. What's going on in here? We're conflicted, right? And we're creating a space or a vacuum, and we want to fill that space with something. Self-love is filling that space with something that's of value, something of goodness. It makes life a little bit better. It's the happy feelings that we might have, and identifying what will make life more valuable, what makes it good, and then filling that space on the inside. So we want to resolve the conflict. We know that they're pulling us in all directions. The media, the definitions of what it means to be a man. What does it mean to be a Black man? What does it mean to be a millennial? They're giving us all of these little small boxes that they want to fit us in. But we're on a journey of growth, growing outside of this box. So the first one is, how do we resolve that conflict? I want to give myself permission, and I want to forgive myself for holding on to things that weren't in my best interest. And now I want to move into the space of filling that space with good things, with good feelings, with good emotions, good experiences, things that are in line and intentional about my preservation or my emotional state, my spiritual state. So the first one is that, be okay with that. Be okay with that line. There is self-love as the preference. And when you find yourself conflicted with, am I doing this to be a little bit, is this starting to become self-pleasuresome? Be okay, forgive yourself. You'll get over that thought and keep moving forward, because it then can become another distraction like the rest of the distractions. And we know why they're there. They're there to make you doubt yourself. They're there to make you focus on them, to focus on the shiny object or the distraction. Hey, I'm doing this for a house. You're not doing this for a house. You wanted to put your family in a better position. A good feeling comes from that hustle. This wasn't just a job. This wasn't just a 9 to 5. What you're doing is intentional, and it is of consequence. You have positive consequences that you're going to enact when it comes to self-love. And then the second one, I think, is that forgiveness piece. So it's the how, the answer to not just what. We'll let you answer the what question for yourself. What do you do to self-love? We won't go all into your business like that. Your self-love will be your self-love. I'm an analytic. Cousin Rose says, somebody, I'm gonna hit this heavy bag. You see the guns, he's more physical. So if you want to build houses or whatever it is that you want to do, you will find your what, but the how, because what you'll notice is there is an emptiness that is created on the inside because you're freeing up space and capacity. You call it absorbity, right? Your ability to absorb more. Yeah. And so forgiveness is the thing, right? Because once that space is opened up, if you don't forgive yourself, then what is the likelihood that you go back and fill it with something else toxic or something else distracting or something else less beneficial for you, not along with your intentional purpose? Remember, your intentional purpose is what matters. Putting in what you want, what intentional, you want to put in things that make it better. So don't leave room for things that are making your life worse. So being willing, forgive yourself. And once you forgive yourself, give yourself permission to try things that are good. You won't like them all, but when you start finding good things, those things can become those things that drive you forward towards your purpose. So for me, that's my recap on love, self-love, with a perspective on masculinity. We gave you the analogy of the sponge. I hope you take that. If you're not filling the sponge with anything, it just becomes dry and brittle. You can fill it with bad stuff, and it will be full of bad stuff. You can fill it with good stuff, and to the point where it can't absorb anymore. It's just seeping out. So what we want you to seep out is the good stuff.
Right. The goods. You know, one more thing about that sponge analogy. If your sponge is dry and brittle, the first fluid that touches it, it takes it no matter what it is, good, bad, or ugly. So it is important to not let your sponge dry out, because you don't want to enact a behavior out of desperation, or create a habit out of desperation, because you're just so depleted, so malnourished in love, you'll take anything. And I think that's another topic as far as how people get into unhealthy relationships and things along that nature. We'll try that one another time. But with every intersation, I like to do a thing. First off, Cousin Mo, you flamed this entire intersation. So hats off to you if I was wearing one, but I don't wear one because I got a bald spot. And then people be like, oh, you're trying to cover up your bald spot. So anyway, imaginary hats off to you. On this intersation, man. You brought the heat, as you always do. That's why I like having you here at least once a month. But before I give you an opportunity to close out with the people, I do want to go ahead and do what I consider for all intersations. I do tools for the first row. So this channel is First Row, 1STWROE. It's a play on my last name. But the first row, what I was taught, that when you sit on the first row, the people on the first row have no distraction between them and the person presenting information. And so because there is no distraction, they make the most money and they get the most information. So I want to thank you guys for sitting on the first row. And because you're on the first row, I have this thing that I like to do called Tools for the First Row. And when I'm coming up with the intersation content, the questions, the topics, or whatever it may be, I'm also thinking about this topic, how it relates to me, and what I think are the tools that have helped me in learning more about the topic or engaging better with the topic. So I have about 5 or 6 tools. I don't know what the number is. I'll tell you when we're on the last tool, but I have 5 tools that I want to share with you in regards to self-love. So the first thing that came to me was self-love is made up of about 90% internal and 10% external. And that goes back to, you know, Cousin Mo, what you were saying from the perspective of, you know, you got to kind of clean up that inner conflict. The thing that came to me was thinking about that seed, and when you plant the seed in the ground, how there's plenty of there's nutrients in the soil that have to be absorbed into the seed. Yeah, that's great. But before that absorption process takes place, there has to be information in that seed for that seed to know what to do. Without that information internally, the seed doesn't know to absorb the nutrients and then how to process those nutrients to sprout roots, to grow, to produce fruit. So it's an internal process, self-love. It can easily, like Moses said, it can easily be distracted externally. Sometimes it can be distracted internally, especially if you're over analytical, or you're overly critical or overly analytical within yourself. But 90% of what you need is already inside of you. It's your information that is within you, and listening to that voice of reason and listening to your gut when it says, I didn't like the way that made me feel. I like how that made me feel, and being able to separate not just the dopamine responses, but the actual nourishment that takes place. So that's the first thing. And last week, I actually wrote this down because last week I did an intersation on Saturday with my guest, Terrellyn, and she made a powerful statement. And it was simply that we are more than enough. And I think a lot of us doubt that we are enough. So that's why we adorn ourselves, with certain things, whether it's certain fancy clothes or, certain jewelry, or it has to be name brand this. We put these things on us because we feel sometimes, not all the times, not everybody who dresses nice or in expensive clothes feels this way, but sometimes I think that people feel that within themselves are not enough. Now, in no way am I telling you to go outside walking naked, because you will be in your own way arrested for indecent exposure. But when you realize that you are enough, period, that's when self-love really becomes powerful, because then you know that you don't have to go really externally to get the primary nutrients that you need. Number 2 was define what love is for yourself. Moses, you put it very well in this Intersation on people are trying to encapsulate and box and border and limit what we perceive self-love to be for ourselves. Thanks, Gab. I appreciate you jumping in. Trying to limit what we perceive self-love to be for ourselves, but nobody can love you better than you can love yourself. And it's a crazy concept to think of, because when we think about the topic of love, we typically think about, in a relationship with somebody and they're supposed to love us. We think about our parents and they're supposed to love us. And in some of those situations, that doesn't happen. That parent may be absent. That parent may be gone. That parent may not have known how to love you properly. So nobody on the face of earth can love you better than you can love yourself. So be willing to define what that love is, and understanding that your love, how you're presenting love to yourself, be able to recognize if you are creating that for yourself in a healthy manner, or if you're imitating what you perceive that love to be because of what society has said. Oh, well, I love myself because I went to school and got a good job, and now I'm doing the things that I need to do to have nice things and pay these expensive bills. Or if you're actually creating what you want love to be. One of the most powerful things that I've actually heard from somebody that I did not particularly care for was that when they lived outside of the country, and they thought when they moved to America, they would be so happy and things would be so great. And then living in America, now they have like the hustle and the grind that they're doing. And they're just like, I'm not any happier than I was when I was actually living in the other country. So be able to identify that if you're creating what love is, your definition of love, or if you're imitating, and it's okay to pull concepts from people. I'm not saying you can't pull conceptions, but make sure that you're the creator and the author of your particular love language. The third thing that I have here is you got to let your story do the driving. And I put a side note here. It says self-love is not a tool to validate or invalidate someone else's story about you. That is something that is, man, whenever we experience rejection, we immediately want to turn around and reject. Oh, well, I didn't care anyway. Like, because when we used to, you might send a girl notes. Will you go with me? Circle 1, yes or no. She sends you back a no circle, and you like, I was just playing anyway. I didn't really want to talk to you. So there, just realize that. Let your story be the one that's doing the driving. It's not about discrediting somebody else's story about you. There's been things that people have said about me, true and false. And either way, I haven't let that sway who I am as a person. I believe that some people have gone as far as to say that, oh, you're just selfish and you don't care about other people. Yet I know that that's not who I am. And I do believe that I care about other people. And I believe that I display that. Now, they may not see the story that I'm presenting, but that is an act of self-love for myself. Like I said, creating this channel was a part of self-love because I wanted to share the reflections that I was having and open up these types of conversations so that we could all grow and learn together, and hopefully end up in a better place for us all. So that was the third thing. The fourth thing is consistency. You have to make loving yourself a non-negotiable part of your daily routine. It's not negotiable. It's like going to the bathroom is almost, maybe you might be able to get away with one day without going. I think you might be hurting, but maybe you can get away with one day without going to the bathroom. But at some point, going to the bathroom is not negotiable. Going back to that sponge element, if you're spending, oh, well, I'll get to self-love tomorrow. I'll get to self-love tomorrow. I'll get to self-love tomorrow. If you're sending that, or you're doing that, eventually your sponge is brittle. And then at some point, you don't care if the water that you get is contaminated. You don't care that the water you get has parasites in it. And so you drink it and then you get sick. And now you have to go through the healing process before you can actually get back to a good state, a good ground or level ground for self-love. So that's the other thing is consistency, make self-love a consistent, non-negotiable part of your daily routine. And then the last thing that I have is safe love. Safe love. Self-love is the basis for which all love will flow from you, or flow from us. However your love bank is internally is what you're going to be distributing when it comes time to love somebody else. And so that's why I feel like sometimes you end up in these particular situations where I call them the "but he loved me though" situations, where, oh, well, but he loved me though. He just didn't have a good role model, or he just didn't have this, he just didn't have that. And the reality is he just doesn't have a love bank that is that has enough funds in order to make an equivocal or a beneficial deposit into somebody else when it comes to love. So realize that the amount of time as we may think that self-love is a selfish thing, it's a self-centered thing, really at the end of the day, your self-love puts you in the position, or the health of your self-love puts you in a position to be able to effectively love others. Now you'll have other challenges, but at least you'll have something that you can pour. You can't pour water into a glass from an empty vase. So as that's pretty much it. Those five particular points are the points that I wanted to point out for the tools for the first row. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's Intersation. Before we get out of here, Cousin Mo, I want you to go ahead and bless the people with any closing comments, thoughts, or things that you want to add before we get out of here.
Man, it's always a thrill, man. Look forward to your next chats. Your Intersations are amazing, but I also like seeing you in the chat rooms of others too, right? So they got to see the brand. They got to understand that there's content out there being developed across YouTube that is speaking to the hearts and minds of those people who we would love to see do business with even. So this might be something that we do out of self-love, giving them this information. But then in my other life, I also love business. I love investments. I love good investment opportunities, new stores opening up, people starting schools or online programs. I'm looking for people to teach, getting the process and the systems and the infrastructure underneath that. How do you receive somebody from Ghana to be a teacher of your bio or biology classroom in New York, somewhere like that? What are the connections that need to be made? Is it just through Google Chats or Hangouts? How do we make these type of connections happen to where we can start doing business one to another? I think that self-love, because we love ourselves, we'll be in a better position to love others. But if we do not take those steps to love ourselves, then we will not be in a position to love others. Like you said, that love bank, we can't transfer positive funds if we have negativity inside of our own accounts. We got to get rid of that negativity, give ourselves forgiveness for taking on that negativity, start pulling in positive funds so we don't have any more room for negativity to the point where we don't have to overdraft. But what we do, we can give some installment loans out to others in the form of love. I don't got no whole lot of money, but I can talk to a couple of people. I can talk to this person who can talk to this person. So that is the start. Are we willing to have those conversations one to another? Peace and love. Love you, Cousin Ro, man. Good show, man.
Man, no, definitely mad love to you. I appreciate the support. Other than that, you guys, thank you for tuning in today. Tomorrow, the next upcoming live show, on the First Row channel will be tomorrow. It's the Wednesday Word. It's at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That topic will be on visual ID. If you want to know what that means, you'll have to be engaged on that show live or catch it on the replay to engage with what that topic is on. But as always, thank you guys for rocking with us. If you like this video, please share it. If you share this video, please like it. If you have not done so already, please go and subscribe to the First Row channel. Make sure you click that bell so you know know that when we're on live, so you can be a part of these conversations, share nuggets and information as well. But other than that, thank you for rocking with us tonight. And we appreciate you for sitting on the first row. Have a good night.
Peace.